What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of an electric or hybrid car? Maybe it's fast acceleration, environmental consciousness, or perhaps the complete lack of sound. Formula One engines have been getting quieter and quieter, and adding even more of an electrical component to the cars is going to further that effect, something no fan wants. Are the 2026 engine regulations going to ruin Formula One engine sound for good? Well, you'll have to stick around to find out. F1 will overhaul the regulations for its V6 hybrid power units in 2026, placing a greater emphasis on electric power and sustainable fuels as part of the series' push to become carbon neutral by 2030. The plans have already successfully brought the Volkswagen Group into F1 through Audi, which will enter in 2026 as an engine supplier. Ford have also committed, and Honda have made a return to the sport. In the past, one of the biggest hurdles facing manufacturers looking to enter F1 as an engine supplier was a challenge of catching up with those already on the grid. This was seen most severely with Honda, which joined F1 1 year after the V6 hybrid power units were introduced and struggled for performance and reliability for a number of seasons. F1 Chief Technical Officer Pat Symonds said that ensuring there was a level playing field for the new engine manufacturers was a key goal of the new engine rules. We set a lot of high-level objectives with the new regulations, and one of the high-level objectives for the 26 power unit was to level the playing field for newcomers, explained Symonds. So we wanted to level the playing field a bit there, because getting people like Audi and Porsche, Cadillac have raised their head. There are others I won't name. That's not a bad thing. It's quite good to have those names in the sport. The more of these big brands that there are in the sport, the more exposure Formula One has, which means more money for all the stakeholders. Having Audi and Honda and Cadillac pushing Formula One through their public engagement channels is only good for the sport. While the level playing field has made it easier for new suppliers to join the grid, the big draw for many of them is the cutting-edge hybrid and sustainable fuel technology that Formula One will allow them to develop. The new F1 power units will run on fully sustainable fuels thanks to intense research and testing from Formula One and partner Aramco. This means that no new fossil carbon will be burned, with carbon instead being derived from non-food sources, genuine municipal waste, or even the atmosphere. The current 1.6-litre V6 turbocharged internal combustion engine will evolve to include a far more powerful electrical component. The MG UK will almost triple the amount of electrical power produced by the current hybrid components. The general public want to feel like they're doing their part to help combat climate change, and an easy way to do that is to have a hybrid or electric vehicle. In the near future, that could be a sustainable fuel vehicle as well. These manufacturers want to show they're involved in that movement. But one of the consequences of the hybrid and electrical vehicles is the loss of sound, something that started with the death of the big capacity Formula One engines. That was the 1995 Ferrari 412, and that is the sound many of us imagine when we think of a Formula One car. It had a 3-litre V12 engine that would rev well past 15,000 RPM, and it sounded otherworldly. Today's engines are kittens compared to the animalistic roar of decades past, and the introduction of more electrical components is only going to make it worse. Or at least, that's what we thought. Formula One CEO Stefano Domenicali has hopefully put fans' concerns at rest. We want a competitive engine, with many horsepower and also with a great sound. 99.9% of people want to hear a Formula One sound on track again, and that's something we put on the table. Today, we're in a transition phase, where large manufacturers need to develop hybrid and electric technologies, since they're part of their sales portfolio. But I believe if we do a good job with sustainable fuels, we will be able to have simplified engines in a few years with a lower impact on weight. It's something we'll soon start thinking about. It's all well saying that the engines will sound better, but Domenicali hasn't said anything about how that will happen. You could just fit a paint can exhaust like the teenage boys do with their VW Polos near where I live, but Formula One will probably want a more elegant solution than that. Domenicali insisted there is no possibility of the series moving to much quieter electrical drivetrains, as used in Formula E. No, it's very clear no, he said. We need to have a different sound. It's music for my ears. It's true that we had the 12 cylinders. It was a different frequency, very loud. And then 10, 8, 6, it's not going again down. It's just the situation is different. Of course we need to be a hybrid. We're going to hybrid for the future. The quieting of F1's engines in 2014 was panned by the series' then CEO Bernie Ecclestone at the time. Senior figures in F1 have continued to argue for a return to the louder engines of old. The noise is part of the emotion, said Red Bull team principal Christian Horner earlier this year. It's part of the DNA of the sport. It's funny how you get used to things, because the V6s, with the energy recovery systems they currently have, are much quieter than the old V10s and V12s, or even the V8s. So now when we roll out a show car, and you hear a V10 or a V8 engine, all the mechanics put down their tools to go and watch the car. Daniel Ricciardo once said something similar. That V10 scream, it has a wow factor and a fear factor. I think a rookie jumping into a V10 would find it scarier than jumping into one of these V6s. But why can't Formula 1 just create new engines that make that kind of sound again? This is the most technologically advanced racing series in the world after all. Surely it's possible. Well, unfortunately, it isn't that simple. Those old Formula 1 engines, the ones that sounded incredible, were short-stroke engines that allowed them to be built with peak power at high revs, and 20,000 RPM was not uncommon in those days. The gear ratios were set to optimize those revs, so other than when just coming out of a corner, the engine RPM window through the gear changes would be very small, probably between 18,000 and 20,000 RPM. What we have now is the complete opposite though. First of all, there's a 15,000 RPM limit set by the regulations, but in reality, no one goes near that. These turbocharged engines will produce maximum torque fairly low in the RPM range, somewhere around 11,000 to 12,000 RPM. So the driver will just shift up around that range, as there's really no point in going any higher in the range. Beyond that, the turbo generates the intake air pressure, and it does that by using the exhaust gas flow pressure. Doing that means the turbo acts like a silencer, reducing the exhaust noise. On top of that, there's the fuel flow limit. This restricts the amount of fuel you can supply to the engine, so again, above a certain RPM, there just isn't any fuel available to make more power. When you include the electrical systems in the equation, all of these systems harness, restrict or silence the RPM, and in turn the exhaust noise. With more electrification coming to Formula 1, it's hard to see a way to make the engine sound anything like the old V10s and 12s. Short of adding synthetic sound effects, there's no way the kind of modern engine F1 needs for 2026 is going to replicate the V10 scream. Ricciardo summed up perfectly what Formula 1 has lost by moving away from those engines. I remember arriving with my dad for the Grand Prix at Melbourne as a kid the first time. We got out of the taxi and got the suitcase out of the boot, and we could hear the F1 cars at the track. Their sound was carrying into the city. I looked at him and he looked at me, and there were goosebumps. It was like, wow, we're here. Our cars are visually exciting as they are so fast, but you don't have that sound. If you saw a fighter jet doing a display and it was electric, it wouldn't be as awesome. In terms of raw performance numbers, today's engines are vastly superior to the engines of decades gone by. But in terms of viewer experience, they really aren't the same, are they? Perhaps you could share some of your favourite memories of the old engines in the comments down below. And until next time, drive safe and bye for now.